My name is Tim Blumentritt, and this presentation discusses global strategy. If you recall from an earlier presentation, the role of the PESTEL framework is to highlight elements in a firm's general environment that may impact its performance. Global strategy considers these same kinds of influences only on a multi-country scale. When a firm does business in multiple countries, it essentially operates in multiple PESTEL environments. Our objective here is to understand how differences between countries impact a firm's top strategies. Doing business internationally creates a wide range of opportunities, but it comes with significant challenges. The potential advantages and disadvantages range across the value system. In the search for inputs, such as abundant or inexpensive raw materials or labor, either in the form of low-cost workers or specialized experts, foreign countries may have much to offer. However, accessing another country's physical and human resources means that the company will also have to abide by the country's dictates. Similarly, in the process of transforming raw materials into finished goods and services, foreign countries can offer manufacturing sites, access to highly trained people that can advance the firm's own technologies, and flexibility if the production sites add to a global network of operations. However, managing far-flung operations comes with the risk that the host governments or partners can take advantage of the investments made by a foreign company. Last, every firm loves the idea of selling goods and services in new markets, even if local competition often starts with the advantage of being based in the host country. While foreign countries may offer lots of potential benefits, they are only worthwhile to a company if they fit into its overall pursuit of superior organizational performance. Doing business in other countries creates complexities that single-country firms do not have to deal with. The fundamental challenge facing multi-country firms is staying focused on their overall performance goals even as they do business in multiple country environments. As such, the purpose of global strategy is to first understand the differences that exist among country environments, and second, to figure out how to best access them to enhance the firm's performance. Let's begin with a framework that explores differences among countries. I will draw from the article Managing Differences by Pankaj Ghemawat. It is the assigned article in this unit. Please take some time to read it thoroughly. The CAGE framework considers countries in terms of distance rather than differences. The author's reason for distinguishing between the two perspectives is that we already know that every country is different than any other. What really matters is how those differences impact strategic decision-making. By thinking in terms of distance, the author adds nuance to how distinctions among country environments shape a firm's participation in those markets. The bigger the distance between two countries, the bigger the difference between how things operate in them. Instead of repeating the points made in that article, the next few slides provide additional ways of considering these four factors. We'll go in order of the acronym: cultural, administrative, geographic, and then economic. Culture essentially describes the way a group of people views the world and chooses to live their lives. The different versions of defining the term culture all seek to describe how a group of people share norms, values, and behaviors. In global strategy, cultural differences impact the way people work together and the way that individuals make decisions. Imagine meeting someone from a different country for the first time. One way to start to get to know them would be ask where they are from. If you know something about the culture of that country, you can make guesses about the characteristics of that person. The other would be to ask what the person is interested in or groups that they are affiliated with. Once you know what the person finds important, you have something to talk about. The first represents a top-down approach to culture. Here, you learn something about the group that the person affiliates with, and then assume those characteristics are shared by the individuals that are part of the group. Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions takes this perspective. Hofstede was an industrial psychologist who gathered an enormous amount of data from people who worked for IBM around the world. From that data, he differentiated among countries on these 6 dimensions. So if you know where each country rates on these dimensions, you have a starting point for knowing something about individuals from that country. The second approach groups people by their interests or what is important to them rather than their nationality. Schwartz was a psychologist who wondered if there was a set of universal values that all people shared. He came up with a list of 10 basic values that he said were of varying importance to all people. In this case, you get to know someone by understanding what is important to them, then inducing characteristics about the groups they likely belong to. This presentation only introduces the terminology of these two approaches to understanding culture, but does not provide any detail at all on them. Internet searches or AI queries will quickly lead to more information. Regardless of the approach, the point of cultural analysis is to provide a quick way of getting to know someone. The point is to speed up the process of moving from ignorance to a relationship. But there needs to be caution in using these treatments of culture. Generalizations can be dangerous if the guesses turn into determinations. When we weigh all people from Germany are, as in Hofstede, that can quickly become all people of this ethnicity are. When this happens, the helpful generalizations can become harmful stereotypes. But when used properly, those starting point generalizations can lead to insights about the best way to work with people or signals of when things are going wrong and how to help people learn to work with one another. This is the point of cultural analysis. Government impacts business in a country by establishing the laws, regulations, and tax code that dictate what is permissible and what is not. Essentially, governments set the rules of the game for economic activity in their countries, as well as trade policies governing transactions that cross country borders. And as indicated by the Cage framework, the more distant or different is a political system, the harder it will be for foreign companies to understand it. But business people, like lawyers and accountants, are very good at figuring out the most advantageous moves once the rules are known. The real challenges arise when the rules might change, especially when those changes may be unpredictable. This is the essence of political risk. While there is always change in politics in every country, some of that change is more disruptive than others. For instance, the United States has a presidential election every 4 years, and there are definitely shifts when someone new is elected. But there are rarely significant disruptions in the way our country actually operates. Political upheavals can be much more dramatic. Think of the Arab Spring in the early 2010s or the war in Ukraine, or countless other places in which there are conditions of great uncertainty. In these cases, businesses very much pay attention to political shifts. The challenge is not necessarily to mitigate the changes because they often can't be stopped, but firms can be ready to deal with changes once they occur. And this requires people and systems that are paying attention to country dynamics and ready to move once the future becomes clearer. So the consideration of politics starts with becoming deeply familiar with the rules of the game in a country as they exist and being ready to adjust as is prudent. The challenge is not necessarily to mitigate the changes because they often can't be stopped, but firms can be ready to deal with changes once they occur. And this requires people and systems that are paying attention to country dynamics and ready to move once the future becomes clearer. So the consideration of politics starts with becoming deeply familiar with the rules of the game in a country as they exist and being ready to adjust as is prudent. Geographic distance in the Cage framework focuses on how difficult it is to move things between countries. These things can be of any sort, from physical goods to information and intellectual property. The interesting point about the Cage framework is that two countries that are geographically proximal may actually have high levels of distance between them. To have efficient flow of goods and information, two countries must develop compatible infrastructures and have solid working relationships. Russia provides an excellent example of the difference between geographic proximity and geographic distance as it is treated in the Cage framework. Russia shares borders with a wide range of other countries, even if you only consider its western boundaries. But there will be very different flows of goods and information between it and countries that are friendly, such as Belarus and the country of Georgia, and those that are part of NATO, such as Finland and Estonia. Alternatively, Consider the distance between the United States and China. In this case, the infrastructure for moving goods between the two countries is extraordinarily efficient, even if the two countries are separated by the Pacific Ocean. The specialized ports and ships that exist are impressive. However, the politics between the two countries can get in the way of these systems working as well as they can. Michael Porter, after finishing up with his work on industries and firms, moved on to consider the differences in performance among countries. He did the same exact type of thinking process with countries as he did with industries and with companies. This time the question was, why do some countries or regions perform better in some industries than others? His response, like the Five Forces model, was a depiction of structural forces in the form of the diamond model. There's one thing about this model that is very important. It doesn't look at a country in general, but at a country or region from the perspective of a particular industry. For instance, Dalton, Georgia has become known as the carpet capital of the world because of the major manufacturers located there, but it's not a center or excellence for any other industry, just carpet. So the interaction here described in the diamond is the combination of a country or region as it is suited for the success of an industry. I'll briefly cover the four elements of the diamond model. Please see the textbook for further details on each. Factors of production are simply the ability of a country to support the activities of an industry. Those factors of production come in either basic forms, such as raw materials, or advanced forms, such as the availability of highly trained people with valuable skill sets. Demand conditions are how much an industry's customers require advancements from it. This means that the companies in the industry will face constant pressure to improve in order to satisfy their customers. While perhaps difficult to meet, this constant pressure to improve will drive the industry to greater levels of global success. Related and supporting industries, on the other end of the value system, push an industry along. If the industries from which an industry buys from are very advanced and move very rapidly, the industry in question has a better chance of being highly competitive. And last is the firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. What Porter was getting at here was the general business environment underlying industry activities. The availability of helpful banks and technology providers and supportive governmental policies, for example, make it easier for a group of companies to pursue excellence. Porter actually directed his diamond model at politicians. His advice to them centered on creating environments that fostered clusters of firms in the same industry so they could support one another. He was particularly concerned with creating incentives to people of similar skill sets to co-locate, which provides the seeds for an industry to flourish. From the perspective of foreign companies, analysis of the diamond model might influence a firm's strategic decisions about where to locate activities. It provides a framework for analyzing potential country locations. By analyzing the 4 points of the diamond, firms can seek out countries or regions that have the resources and expertise to contribute to their own strategic performance. This leads to better investment decisions, and these foreign firms can create a solid standing with host governments if they can demonstrate how their own investments into the country can actually spur on the country's own success by adding activity to the clusters they support. Taken together, the CAGE framework prompts executives to ask detailed questions about foreign countries and their ability to support the ambitions of the firm. Breaking things down by cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic distances is a great start to exploring the best places for a firm to access opportunities in foreign markets while minimizing the challenges that might arise when doing so. Firms put the findings of the CAGE framework into action when they build strategies for operating internationally. This graphic has been a standard in international strategy for decades. The Integration Responsiveness Framework is a foundational concept in international business strategy that helps firms navigate the complex trade-offs between achieving global efficiency and responding to local market needs. It provides a lens through which companies can evaluate and design their organizational strategies and structures. At its core, this framework identifies 2 key pressures that shape international strategy: global integration and local responsiveness. These pressures are not mutually exclusive. Rather, they exist on a continuum and often pull firms in opposing directions. Global integration refers to the extent to which a firm seeks to standardize and coordinate its operations across different countries to achieve economies of scale, consistency, and efficiency. This pressure is typically driven by factors such as the globalization of customer preferences, the need to leverage core competencies across markets, and the pursuit of cost reductions through centralized production or R&D. Firms facing high integration pressures often adopt a global strategy, characterized by centralized decision-making and uniform products or services across markets. In contrast, local responsiveness reflects the need to adapt products, services, and business practices to suit the specific demands of individual national markets. This pressure arises from differences in consumer preferences, regulatory environments, cultural norms, and competitive landscapes. Firms that prioritize responsiveness tend to adopt a multi-domestic strategy, decentralizing decision-making and tailoring offerings to local conditions. 4 generic strategies flow from it. An international strategy occurs when firms leverage home-based competencies abroad with minimal adaptation. Firms that are making their first steps into global markets through exporting or licensing are using an international strategy. In a global strategy, firms pursue efficiency through standardization. Examples include companies like Apple or Intel, which offer largely uniform products worldwide. In a multi-domestic strategy, firms customize extensively for local markets. Consumer goods companies like Unilever often follow this approach. The most complex strategy for global business is a transnational strategy. It seeks to balance global efficiency with local adaptation. Firms like Nestlé or McDonald's exemplify this approach, combining global branding with local menu customization. While ideal in theory, a transnational strategy is notoriously difficult to implement due to the organizational complexity it entails. It requires a flexible structure, knowledge sharing across borders, and a culture that supports both global coordination and local initiative. But these general approaches to doing business globally gloss over an important point. Firms do not have to take the same approach to international business for all elements of their businesses. To see this point, consider the many ways that firms can make initial entries into a foreign market. Selecting the right one depends not only on the broad approach to global business that a firm is utilizing, but also the function that is the focus of the international move. By that I mean that a single firm could use more than one of the means of entry depending on what the country offers. For example, using exporting to sell products in small countries, wholly owned subsidiaries for sales in large countries, and a joint venture for manufacturing in a low-cost country. Because of the differences among countries, as highlighted by the CAGE framework, firms get very creative when designing their locations around the world. And this leads to multinational corporations. Multinational corporations, or MNCs, are complex networks of operations around the world. Each location might be a central hub of activity or a location with a specific strategic mandate. These locations have dual performance targets. They should do excellent work as a unit with a specific mandate within a country, but more importantly, they also must contribute to the performance of an MNC as a whole. What characterizes MNCs are these 3 elements. They have owned operations in many countries. Those operations are differentiated by the country in which they are located and the role they play, and those varied operations work together in a linked and coordinated way. MNCs evolve into these complex structures by specifying their entry into countries based on a match between their strategic needs and the nature of the country, as described by the CAGE framework, even as each unit is always supposed to support the overall strategic goals of the MNC. To summarize, we study global strategy to understand how country business environments differ from one another. I use the CAGE framework as the starting point to explore economic, cultural, political, and geographic distances between one country and another. Within each of those 4 categories, we can bring additional tools to understand each. For example, we used Porter's Diamond Model to further explore economic conditions for an industry within a country. Those differences among countries create opportunities, as well as challenges, for companies as they pursue their global ambitions. When companies evolve into complex networks of operations, we call them multinational corporations. These companies have a diverse array of units around the world, even as the performance of each unit contributes to the overall performance of a single company. And this concludes the presentation.